Deep in the heart of ancient Africa, where the baobab trees stretched their gnarled branches toward the heavens and the drums of distant villages echoed through the night, there lived a sorcerer named Kwame, whose thirst for knowledge had consumed his very soul. For decades, he had studied the forbidden arts, delving into rituals that even the eldest shamans dared not speak of in daylight. His hut, hidden in a grove of fever trees, was filled with bones bleached white by the sun, clay pots containing mysterious powders, and scrolls written in languages that predated memory itself. Kwame had been born during a lunar eclipse, when the spirits were said to walk freely among the living. His mother, a renowned healer in the village of Ashanti, had recognized the mark of power upon him from his first breath. The child's eyes held an ancient wisdom that seemed to peer through the veil of reality itself. As he grew, it became clear that Kwame possessed abilities far beyond those of ordinary mortals. He could speak with the spirits of the dead, command the winds to change direction, and heal wounds that would have claimed lesser men. The village elders, recognizing his potential, had taken him under their tutelage when he reached his 13th year. They taught him the sacred rituals, the ancient songs that could bend reality to one's will, and the proper methods for communing with the ancestors. But Kwame's hunger for knowledge was insatiable. He sought out forbidden texts, studied under hermit shamans who lived in caves far from civilization, and experimented with rituals that tested the very boundaries of existence. By the time he reached his 40th year, Kwame had witnessed the death of 3 generations of his people. He had seen children grow old and wither while he remained unchanged, his power sustaining him far beyond mortal years. Yet even his magic could not halt the slow decay that crept through his bones like termites through dead wood. Each morning, he would examine his hands in the murky water of his divination bowl, noting new lines, new spots, the subtle loosening of skin that spoke of mortality's approach. The sorcerer's first attempt at extending his life had come during his 60th year, when he felt the first true pangs of aging. He had created an elixir from the blood of a white lion, the tears of a mourning widow, and the essence of a star that had fallen to earth. The potion had granted him another 50 years of life, but at a terrible cost. His hair had turned white as bone, his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his eyes had begun to reflect light like those of a nocturnal beast. As the decades passed, Kwame's obsession with immortality grew stronger. He watched kingdoms rise and fall, witnessed the birth of new religions and the death of old gods, and saw the slow encroachment of foreign influences upon the sacred lands of his ancestors. With each passing year, he felt the weight of accumulated knowledge pressing down upon him like a mountain of stone. He had become a living repository of ancient wisdom, a guardian of secrets that would die with him if he could not find a way to transcend mortality. The revelation came to him during the season of the red moon, when the veil between worlds grew thin as spider silk. In his dreams, the ancestors whispered of a ritual so ancient and terrible that it had been forbidden since the time when the first humans walked the earth. It was a ceremony that would grant true immortality, but at a price that would transform the practitioner into something beyond human understanding. The spirits spoke of ingredients that must be gathered from the 4 corners of the continent, of incantations that must be spoken in the tongue of the first shamans, and of a sacrifice that would bind the sorcerer's soul to the very essence of darkness itself. The ancestors warned him that the ritual had been attempted only once before, by a pharaoh whose name had been erased from all records. They showed him visions of what the pharaoh had become, a creature of shadow and hunger that had stalked the Nile for 1,000 years before finally being bound by the combined efforts of every priest and sorcerer in the land. The binding had required the sacrifice of an entire city, its people offering their lives to create a prison strong enough to contain the monster. Despite these warnings, Kwame's desire for immortality overwhelmed his caution. He began to research the ritual in earnest, studying fragments of text that had survived the purges of successive generations. He learned that the ceremony required not just exotic ingredients, but also a specific alignment of celestial bodies, a convergence that occurred only once every 3,000 years. The next alignment was approaching, and Kwame knew that this would be his only chance to achieve true immortality. For months, Kwame traveled across the vast landscapes of Africa, seeking the components for his ritual. His first journey took him to the Sahara, where he spent weeks wandering through the endless dunes in search of a tomb that existed only in legend. The grave of the nameless pharaoh was said to be hidden beneath the shifting sands, protected by curses that would drive lesser men mad. When Kwame finally found the tomb, he discovered that it was not empty, as he had hoped. The pharaoh's mummified remains still lay within, but they had been transformed into something that defied description. The body pulsed with a malevolent energy that made the air itself seem to writhe and twist. From this accursed tomb, Kwame collected sand that had been stained black by the pharaoh's corrupted essence. The sand burned his hands as he gathered it, leaving scars that would never heal. As he prepared to leave, he heard a voice calling from the depths of the tomb, the pharaoh's spirit begging for release from the torment of his existence. Kwame turned away without answering, hardening his heart against the creature's pleas. The second leg of his journey took him to the mountains of the moon, where the peaks touched the very roof of the world. Here, in caves that had never known sunlight, dwelt the mountain spirits, beings of pure elemental force that had existed since the earth was young. To obtain the heart of such a spirit, Kwame had to engage in a battle of wills that lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. The spirit, an ancient entity that had witnessed the birth of continents, fought with the fury of an avalanche and the persistence of erosion. The battle was not fought with weapons, but with pure magical force, each combatant trying to overwhelm the other's defenses. Kwame's human limitations nearly proved his undoing, as the spirit's attacks threatened to shatter his mind like glass. In the end, he emerged victorious only by invoking the names of his ancestors, calling upon the combined power of generations of shamans to bolster his strength. The spirit's heart, when he finally claimed it, was a crystal of pure mountain stone that pulsed with an inner light. From the depths of the Congo, Kwame retrieved the tears of a river goddess, a being of such beauty and sorrow that mortals who looked upon her were said to weep for the rest of their lives. The goddess dwelt in a hidden grotto where the water ran so pure that it reflected not just images, but the very souls of those who gazed into it. To obtain her tears, Kwame had to tell her the story of his quest, knowing that she would see through any deception. The goddess listened to his tale with growing sadness, her eyes reflecting the weight of centuries. When he finished, she wept for him, not for his noble intentions, but for the tragedy that he was about to bring upon himself. Her tears, when they fell, crystallized into gems of impossible beauty, each one containing a fragment of her divine sorrow. She gave them to him willingly, knowing that they would be used in a ritual that would damn him forever. The final component required a journey to the southern deserts, where the first humans had walked upright beneath the African sun. Here, in a valley that existed outside of normal time, lay the bones of the first ancestor, the primordial human from whom all others had descended. The valley was guarded by the ghosts of every human who had ever lived, their spirits forming a barrier that no living person could cross without permission. Kwame approached the valley during the darkest hour of night, when the boundary between life and death was at its thinnest. He called upon the names of his ancestors, tracing his lineage back through countless generations until he reached the first mother and the first father. Only then did the ghostly guardians part, allowing him to enter the sacred valley. The first ancestor's bones lay in a simple grave, marked only by a circle of stones. As Kwame approached, he felt the weight of humanity's entire history pressing down upon him. These bones had given rise to every civilization, every achievement, every tragedy that had followed. To disturb them was to violate the very essence of what it meant to be human. With trembling hands, Kwame removed a single bone from the grave, feeling it crumble to dust at his touch. The powder glowed with an inner light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. As he collected the sacred remains, he heard the voice of the first ancestor speaking to him across the ages, warning him of the path he had chosen and the price he would pay. The ritual began at midnight during the new moon, when darkness ruled absolute over the land. Kwame had chosen a location far from any human settlement, a barren plateau where the earth itself seemed to recoil from his presence. He arranged the sacred items in a circle around himself, each component placed according to the precise instructions whispered by the ancestors. The sand from the pharaoh's tomb formed the outer ring, its black grains seeming to absorb the light of the stars themselves. Within this circle, he placed the mountain spirit's heart, its crystalline surface reflecting the otherworldly energies that were beginning to gather. The river goddess's tears formed points of light around the perimeter, their beauty a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. At the center of it all, he sprinkled the powder made from the first ancestor's bone, creating a connection that spanned the entirety of human existence. As the ritual began, Kwame started to chant in the ancient tongue, his voice growing deeper and more resonant with each passing hour. The very air around him seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with malevolent energy that made the night creatures flee in terror. The ground beneath his feet began to crack and split, as if the earth itself was trying to escape the corruption that was spreading from the ritual site. The transformation began slowly, starting with subtle changes that might have been mistaken for tricks of the light. Kwame's shadow began to move independently, writhing and twisting as if it had gained a life of its own. His reflection in the crystalline heart showed not his human form but something else, something that defied description. The very atoms of his being were beginning to restructure themselves, following patterns that existed outside the natural order. As the hours passed, the changes became more pronounced. Kwame's skin grew rough and scaled, taking on the texture of ancient bark. His bones elongated and twisted, reshaping themselves into something that defied natural law. His spine curved and extended, forming a tail that lashed behind him like a whip. His hands became claws, capable of rending both flesh and spirit, and his teeth grew long and sharp, designed for purposes that no human mouth should contemplate. The transformation was not merely physical, but spiritual as well. Kwame's consciousness expanded beyond human limitations, allowing him to perceive the threads of fate that connected all living things. He could see the life force flowing through every creature, every plant, every stone. He could feel the pulse of the earth itself, the rhythm of seasons, the cycle of death and rebirth that governed all existence. But with this knowledge came a terrible hunger, an insatiable need to consume the very essence of life itself. As dawn approached, the final stage of the transformation began. Kwame's eyes, once warm and brown, became pools of liquid shadow that reflected no light. His voice transformed into a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth itself, a harmonious blend of wind through caverns and the grinding of tectonic plates. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around his words, reshaping itself to accommodate his will. The ritual reached its climax as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. The sacred components burst into flame, their energies combining in a conflagration that could be seen from miles away. The fire was not orange or red, but a color that had no name, a hue that existed only in the spaces between dimensions. As the flames consumed the ritual circle, they also consumed the last vestiges of Kwame's humanity, burning away everything that had once made him human. When dawn broke over the African plains, the sorcerer Kwame was no more. In his place stood a creature of shadow and nightmare, neither fully human nor entirely beast. His immortality had been achieved, but at the cost of everything that had once made him human. He could no longer feel compassion, love, or joy. These emotions had been burned away in the fires of transformation, leaving only an endless, gnawing emptiness that could never be filled. The creature that had once been Kwame began to roam the continent, drawn by the scent of life force like a moth to flame. His first victims were the animals that had fled from the ritual site, creatures that had been unable to escape the expanding circle of his influence. He found that he could drain their life essence with a touch, leaving behind only dried husks that crumbled to dust at the slightest breeze. Villages would wake to find their livestock drained of all vitality, their crops withered and black. Children would disappear in the night, leaving behind only strange footprints and the lingering scent of decay. The elders would speak in hushed tones of the shadow that walked among them, the price of reaching too far beyond mortal bounds. They would perform protective rituals and hang charms from their doorways, but nothing could keep the monster at bay when he chose to feed. As centuries passed, the monster's legend grew and spread across the continent. It was said that he could take any form, appearing as a trusted friend or beloved family member before revealing his true nature. Some claimed he could command the spirits of the dead, forcing them to serve his will. Others whispered that he fed not just on life force but on hope itself, leaving his victims hollow shells of their former selves. The creature's immortality proved to be both blessing and curse. While his body could not age or die, his mind began to fragment under the weight of endless existence. Memories of his human life became distant echoes, fragments of a dream half remembered. He would sometimes find himself standing in places he did not recognize, with no memory of how he had arrived there. The isolation was absolute, for no living thing could bear his presence for long without withering away. In his lucid moments, the monster would remember the man he had once been, the noble intentions that had driven him to seek immortality. He had wanted to protect his people, to preserve the ancient knowledge that was being lost to time. Instead, he had become the very thing that threatened to destroy everything he had once held dear. The irony was not lost on him, even in his transformed state. The African continent itself seemed to recoil from his presence. Rivers would run backward when he approached, and the very ground would crack and split beneath his feet. Animals would flee before him, sensing the wrongness that emanated from his being. Even the spirits of the ancestors, who had once whispered guidance in his ear, now turned away in horror at what he had become. The land that had once nurtured him now treated him as a cancer, something to be expelled or contained. As the modern world encroached upon the ancient lands, the monster found himself increasingly isolated. The old beliefs that had sustained him were fading, replaced by new gods and new fears. The people no longer spoke his name in terror, for they had forgotten the old stories. Cities rose where once there had been only wilderness, and the ancient paths that he had walked for centuries were paved over with concrete and asphalt. Yet he remained, a relic of a time when magic was real and the boundaries between worlds were thin as morning mist. In the depths of the remaining wilderness, he continued his eternal hunt, feeding on whatever life he could find. Sometimes he would encounter other supernatural beings, creatures of legend that had survived the march of progress, but even they fled from his presence, recognizing him as something that transcended the natural order of predator and prey. The sorcerer's quest for immortality had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but the price had been everything that made existence worthwhile. He had gained eternal life, but lost his eternal soul, becoming a cautionary tale whispered around fires by those who still remembered the old ways. His story serves as a reminder that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, some power too terrible to wield, and some prices too high to pay, even for the promise of forever. In the end, Kwame's transformation had achieved its intended purpose. He had become truly immortal, freed from the constraints of human mortality. But immortality, he discovered, was not the blessing he had imagined. It was a curse that would follow him through all eternity, a reminder that some desires are too dangerous to fulfill, and some dreams too costly to pursue. The monster that had once been a man continued to walk the earth, a living testament to the terrible price of reaching beyond the bounds of human existence.